movie opens up in the near future, the year 2048, where Earth is overcrowded and has nearly run out of natural resources. This has caused the nations to wage wars against one another. Several people are killed, and the remaining resources are further depleted. To address this, the government plans to genetically modify 14 soldiers for a mission to Saturn's moon Titan. They want to create a new society there which is suitable for humans. Following this, the volunteers taking part in this experiment and their families are brought to top-notch homes in a new neighborhood, all loaded with advanced technology. The scene then shifts to Rick, a former pilot who is among these volunteers. He brings his wife Abigail, a doctor, and their son Lucas to their new house and seems happy to spend their time together. Soon, they get to know that 13 other families have been brought to the neighborhood, and that they all will take part in a research experiment with a group of experienced scientists and doctors. The following day, Dr. Collingwood, who leads the program, meets with Rick and mentions that he has high hopes for him. Both Rick and Abigail are doing this for their son's future, but the latter is worried that Rick might get sick during the process. Collingwood acknowledges this risk, but also reassures her that Rick will receive proper care throughout the experiment. After all the volunteers settle in, they have a meeting with Collingwood to start the treatment. Collingwood then explains the program's purpose, emphasizing how Earth is in a dire state, with the remaining resources to become empty in a decade. He then emphasizes that Titan is the only other place in the solar system with an atmosphere. However, he also mentions that Titan is extremely harsh, with methane rain, unswimmable lakes, a nitrogen-rich atmosphere, and freezing temperatures. So, instead of changing the planet to suit us, they're planning to alter humans genetically to adapt to Titan's conditions. Right then, one volunteer wonders how their bodies will accept these changes, and Collingwood mentions that they're using successful clinical trials that can give them the results. He also makes it clear that there's no guarantee that everyone will survive. This leads to further questions, but Rick intervenes, telling the doubter to leave if he's not on board. After the meeting, the volunteers receive card keys to access the base and head to the lab for the first of the 300 shots they'll receive over the next few weeks. One of the doctors in the base, Dr. Freya, tries to explain the purpose of each shot, but Rick only grasps half of it. The doctor mentions that after each shot, he will be consuming more nitrogen in place of oxygen. During this time, the volunteers become fast friends and enjoy gatherings like dinner parties and barbecues because they're neighbors now. At one barbecue party, they drink more than usual since it's the last time they can consume alcohol, and Abigail also joins them. In the evening, Abigail feels dizzy from drinking, and Rick starts coughing and struggling to breathe. Abigail helps him to bed and notices that he has a high fever. His wife is worried for him and cares for him throughout the night. The following day, Collingwood is pleased with the progress of the volunteers' DNA samples, leading to a significant test. He then gathers the volunteers and asks them to stay underwater without oxygen tanks. Most of the volunteers give up after a few minutes, and only Rick and Tally manage to stay in the pool for more than 30 minutes, turning it into a competition. Tally feels difficulty in breathing after 39 minutes, but Rick surprises everyone by swimming underwater like a dolphin and coming out after a record 42 minutes, pleasing Collingwood. In the evening, Rick shows this new skill to Lucas in the pool. Afterward, Rick and Abigail get intimate in the water, during which the latter notices black veins on Rick's body. Rick replies that it might be due to a reaction from the experiment and dismisses the issue. A few days later, the volunteers undergo their first surgery. A fellow wife named Rayanne visits Abigail, expressing her fear and doubt about her husband's presence in the program. Abigail comforts her, emphasizing that the volunteers are saving humanity and their children's future. Following the surgery, Rick recovers well and spends time with his family. Abigail is relieved but worried about the potential side effects mentioned in the manual. One night, Abigail wakes up to find Rick absent from the bed. Worried, she searches around and finds him in the kitchen, applying ice to his skin because of excessive heat. Abigail then prepares a larger bucket of cold water, and Rick dips his hands in it, realizing that he can no longer feel the cold. The following day, after going on a morning run with Abigail, Rick joins the volunteers to perform various experiments, like running with nitrogen masks to simulate Titan's atmosphere and enduring long swims in frigid water. During this, some volunteers can't handle it and need to leave for the day. Tally, however, is determined to endure the cold and even learns underwater meditation from Rick. After one testing session, all of the volunteers are in the showers, and at the same time, Rick notices that he's losing his hair, which Tally also confirms. Suddenly, they hear screams, and one of the volunteer women suffers from a seizure and vomits blood. Despite the doctor's efforts, they can't save her, marking the first death among the volunteers. Later that day, the volunteers gather at Rick's home and have a meeting to discuss the incident. Some of the volunteers are worried about their own safety, but others remind them of the known risks. Despite not being allowed to drink alcohol, they drink to cope with the situation. Outside, Rayanne comforts her husband Zane, while Andrew, Tally's husband, helps Abigail in the kitchen. Suddenly, during dinner, they hear screams from the garden and notice that Zane is having a breakdown, attacking Rayanne. Immediately, everyone rushes out and restrains Zane, while Abigail comforts Rayanne. The next day, Abigail notices some of the doses being given to Rick are quite high and wants to talk to Collingwood, but he's unavailable. Later, Rick starts vomiting blood, and Abigail asks him to rest while she cleans. When he's not looking, she takes a sample of his blood to test on her own. The next time Rick uses the pool, he notices his skin is peeling, but he doesn't seem overly concerned. At bedtime, Abigail observes Rick's deteriorating skin and hair loss, causing her to worry more about him. The following day, Abigail examines Rick's blood under a microscope and discovers it's turning black. She then realizes that the doctors and scientists are hiding something important from them. Meanwhile, the volunteers undergo a major procedure to make their eyes able to see in the dark. The surgery is successful, but Rick needs to keep his eyes bandaged for a while, requiring his family's assistance at home. The scene then shifts to the night, when Abigail hears Rick in pain and his eyes bleeding. Afraid, she rushes him to the lab for another surgery. Here, Abigail gets a chance to meet Collingwood and confronts him, mentioning the hidden cameras at her house and the strange things happening to Rick. Collingwood explains that he didn't want the cameras but had to follow Pentagon orders for security. He also reassures her that his blindness is part of the process and will resolve in a few days. However, Abigail suspects Collingwood is hiding something, but is sent home. At home, Abigail begins packing clothes for Rick, but goes outside after she hears sirens. She sees the army surrounding Zane's house, and despite not being allowed closer, she witnesses a horrifying scene. Zane, mutated, throws Rayanne through a window, killing her. The soldiers then enter the house to control him and eventually kill Zane too. Back at the base, Abigail looks after Rick and hears more soldiers arriving. With Collingwood occupied, she seizes the opportunity to take Rick's card key and starts snooping around the lab. After evading security, she enters Collingwood's office and discovers files revealing that the volunteers' DNA is being combined with animal DNA to create a new form called Homo titanians. Meanwhile, Collingwood is in a meeting with Colonel Solano and NASA representatives who want to shut down the program, deeming it unproven science. They accuse Collingwood of making the volunteers violent and straying from their space exploration mission. Colonel Solano wants the experiment stopped, but Collingwood and his advisor argue and decide to wait for the final order from the Minister of Defense. After the meeting, Freya also suggests stopping the experiment to Collingwood, but he dismisses her. Later, Collingwood visits Rick at his home and explains that his sight will return in 24 hours. He also talks to Abigail and accepts that they underestimated the brain's ability to handle enhanced senses, leading to Zane's mental overload. Abigail demands the truth, and Collingwood finally admits that they're injecting animal DNA into the volunteers. He clearly states that he can't guarantee its success, acknowledging Abigail's concerns, but reminding her that risks were known from the start. Collingwood eventually leaves, not before telling Abigail that Rick must undergo the new procedure to survive. The following day, Rick removes the bandages, confirming his sight is fine, and shaves his head to avoid bald spots. Later at night, he realizes that he can see everything in the dark, and decides to proceed with the other procedures. While the families stay home, all the volunteers undergo surgery, but most face complications and die. In the end, only Rick and Tally are left, and we see that they've transformed into mutated creatures, communicating through touch and low-frequency sounds humans can't hear. Next, Andrew, Abigail, and Lucas visit Rick and Tally, and are shocked by their appearance. As soon as Rick sees his family, he approaches the glass barrier, making Abigail cry. It seems like, despite the procedures, he still remembers his family. Right then, Collingwood gives Abigail Rick's wedding ring and informs her that Rick and Tally will soon depart for Titan, but for now, they're allowed to stay home. Later at home, Rick struggles with human clothing, accidentally hitting Abigail when she tries to help. Rick is changed and spends most of his time in the pool, where he feels more comfortable than inside. The same night, Abigail discovers Tally entering the garden with a bloody hand. Rick and Tally communicate through strange tentacles from their fingers. Here, we learn that because of the aggressive nature, Tally has killed his husband. Soon, the army arrives in the neighborhood, and Andrew is found dead in the shower. As soon as Abigail knows about this, she hides upstairs with Lucas. Soldiers shoot Tally with tranquilizer darts, but she fights back while Rick incapacitates the remaining soldiers. When he tries to drown one in the pool, Abigail intervenes, but it's too late. Fortunately, Rick manages to escape, and Colonel Solano orders a search for him, disregarding Collingwood's request to spare him for research. Abigail and Lucas are taken to the base for safety, but the former leaves to search for Rick. She goes straight to their special spot, and as she assumed, finds Rick there. Abigail then offers her hand to him, showing that she's no longer afraid, and they share a kiss. Right then, Army helicopters locate them and knock Rick out. Next, Abigail wakes up at the base with Collingwood by her side, explaining that they had to restrain her for her safety. The Pentagon plans to shut down the program, necessitating Rick's immediate transfer to Titan. Abigail is then tasked with convincing Rick to make the journey voluntarily. Afterward, Abigail is brought to see Rick, who is inside a glass enclosure. Collingwood wants her to administer a shot of quetiapine, which would essentially erase all of Rick's memories and make it easier for him to depart. Initially, Abigail is hesitant about this, but Collingwood insists, assuring her that it's the only way to get Rick to leave voluntarily. Right then, a soldier hands her the injection, and Abigail purposely drops it, making the soldier bend down to pick it up. Abigail then enters the enclosure, exchanges a meaningful look with Rick, and administers the injection, causing him to pass out. As she comes out, Abigail asks Freya to accompany her, while a soldier approaches Rick to prepare him for the journey. However, to the soldier's bad luck, Rick was only pretending to be unconscious and attacks him, killing him instantly. Collingwood realizes that Abigail had swapped the quetiapine for saline from the drawer when the soldier wasn't looking, and she had given Rick the saline instead. To control the situation, the soldiers open fire, but Rick escapes and hides in dark areas where his enhanced vision gives him an advantage. Meanwhile, Abigail retrieves Lucas, and Freya guides them to an alternate exit. There, they reunite with Rick, who is severely wounded. Lucas and Abigail hug him to reassure him that they aren't scared, and Freya searches for medicine. Suddenly, all the soldiers converge on the scene. Collingwood also arrives there and instructs the women to step away, threatening to have the soldiers open fire on everyone. However, Abigail refuses to back down. Furious, Collingwood orders the soldiers to fire, but Colonel Solano intervenes, refusing to shoot 2 unarmed women and an innocent child. Solano instead points his gun at Collingwood, and the other soldiers follow suit. Collingwood is then arrested, and Abigail rushes to Rick's side. Her hug helps Rick reinforce his most precious memories. The scene then fast-forwards a few weeks, when Abigail and Freya have become researchers on the Titan II project, using more ethical methods to save the world. Meanwhile, Rick is sent to Titan, where he discovers his new body has wings and the ability to fly in his new home. The movie ends with Lucas asking his mother to look at the clear sky at night, and Rick enjoying his new atmosphere, flying around in Titan with his newfound ability.